Have you noticed how loud life has become? Even in quiet rooms, there's noise, messages waiting, thoughts racing, tasks stacking like shadows that never quite fade. We live in a world that moves faster than our breath, and somewhere along the way we stopped asking how we feel and started asking what we've missed. I used to think being overwhelmed was just a sign of modern life. That maybe this was normal to wake up tired, to move through the day in a blur, to fall asleep not rested but simply shut down. But slowly, softly, I began to question, is this really living? Or just surviving? In the quiet corners of Japan, I discovered something different. A way of being that doesn't fight the noise, it simply doesn't invite it in. It lets space be space, time be time. There is no rush to become more, only the gentle unfolding of what already is. Wisdom here lives in teacups, in doorways, in the silence between things. It doesn't ask for attention, but it offers clarity if you choose to listen. This isn't about changing your whole life. It's about remembering how to see it. With soft eyes, with fewer layers, with more breath. These lessons aren't new, and they're not mine. They've been passed through generations, in gestures, in pauses, in the way someone places a bowl down with care. And the more I sat with the quiet, the more I realized that peace doesn't come from fixing everything. It comes from noticing what was never broken, from finding rhythm in the small, meaning in the overlooked. Let me tell you how I began to understand. Lesson 1: create space before you add anything. I used to think that something was missing. That if I could just add the right thing, the right plan, the right object, the right habit, life would feel whole. So I kept adding. More notebooks to organize my thoughts. More shelves to hold what I couldn't part with. More commitments that promised meaning. But the more I added, the heavier everything became. Like trying to breathe in a room with no windows. One morning in a small town outside Kyoto, I stepped into a tea room. It was almost empty, just tatami mats, a low table, and a small alcove with a single vase holding one branch of plum blossom. The light came in quietly, like it knew not to disturb the silence. And I realized then, it wasn't the presence of something that made the room feel alive. It was the space. In Japanese life, space isn't empty. It's active. It holds presence, breath, attention. There's a word for this: the pause between things, the silence that makes the sound clear. Without space, even beauty becomes noise. Even peace becomes clutter. I began to wonder, how many things had I added out of fear? Fear of not having enough. Fear of being left behind. Fear of silence itself. But when I started removing gently, not as a purge, but as a soft offering back to stillness, something changed. I began to see what was already here. A table with nothing on it became a place to rest my eyes. A free afternoon, once packed with errands, became a chance to breathe. An open drawer, no longer overflowing, invited my hands in gently. Creating space isn't about emptiness. It's about readiness. About allowing life to enter in its own time. When you clear a corner of your home, you're not losing something. You're making room for meaning. So before you add another thing, ask yourself softly, is there space for it to matter? Or would it be more powerful to let space speak first? Lesson 2: let quiet become your teacher. Silence used to make me restless. I filled it without thinking: music, messages, background noise, just to keep the stillness away. It felt too empty, too uncertain. But the more I avoided quiet, the more disconnected I became. From others. From myself. From the present moment that was quietly waiting for me to notice. Then I spent a few days in a small mountain village in Japan. The kind of place where time feels slower, where the air moves differently. One evening, I sat on the wooden porch of an old house, listening to nothing. No voices. No traffic. Just the occasional rustle of wind through cedar trees. And as the silence deepened, something softened in me too. Not everything needed to be said. Not everything needed to be solved. In that quiet, I began to feel held not by words, but by presence. In Japanese culture, silence is not an absence to be filled, but a presence to be honored. It's in the space between conversations. In the quiet way tea is poured. In the way people wait before responding, not to delay, but to listen. Truly listen. We often rush to fill every gap. To speak quickly. To fix discomfort. But silence has its own rhythm. Its own voice. It teaches patience. It teaches how to sit with a question without needing an answer right away. It allows emotions to settle, like leaves drifting slowly to the bottom of a still pond. I began to practice silence in small ways. Drinking tea without distractions. Walking without headphones. Letting a conversation pause without fear. And in those moments, I noticed things I had long forgotten. The sound of my own breath. The way light shifts across a room. The quiet thoughts beneath the noisy ones. Letting quiet become your teacher doesn't require a retreat or a vow. It begins the moment you stop resisting stillness and begin welcoming it. What might you hear if you gave silence more space in your day? Could it be that the answers you're seeking are already whispering? Lesson 3. Make rituals from the ordinary. One of the first things I noticed in Japan was how slowly people moved through small tasks. A woman wiping down a table with deliberate care. A man arranging fruit at a market, pausing to admire its color before placing it gently on the shelf. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing was done halfway. These weren't grand ceremonies, just daily movements, carried out with presence. And yet, each one felt sacred in its own quiet way. At first, I didn't understand. Why fold a towel so precisely? Why serve tea with such attention to the angle of the cup? But over time, I began to feel the difference between doing something to get it done, and doing something to give it meaning. A ritual doesn't require candles or chants. It simply asks you to show up fully, even for the small things. We live in a world that encourages multitasking, shortcuts, and speed. But what gets lost in that rush is depth, the invisible thread that turns moments into memories. Japanese wisdom teaches that even the most ordinary action can be an offering. Sweeping the floor becomes an act of respect. Preparing a simple meal becomes a practice in balance. Hanging laundry in sunlight becomes a quiet meditation. I started with just one thing: washing the dishes without distractions. Feeling the warmth of the water. Noticing the curve of each bowl. Drying them slowly, like tucking them in. And to my surprise, something changed. The task no longer felt like a chore. It became a rhythm, a grounding, a return. One small ritual became a doorway back to myself. You don't need more time to make a ritual. You need less noise, less rushing, more noticing, and perhaps a little more reverence for what's already in your hands. What if the peace you've been searching for is already hidden in your daily routine? Could it be that the sacred has always lived in the simple? Lesson 4. Let nature in even a little. I once visited a tiny apartment in Tokyo, barely enough room for a bed, a desk, and a small kitchen. But by the window there was a single plant. A slender stalk of bamboo in a clear glass jar. It stood quietly, catching the morning light, swaying slightly when the wind passed through the open window. That little gesture, a plant in a glass, changed the entire feeling of the space. It made the room feel alive, connected, breathing. In Japanese life, nature is not something separate. It is part of everything. You see it in the way seasons are honored with seasonal foods, changing decorations, and quiet celebrations of fleeting beauty. A falling cherry blossom is not just beautiful. It's a reminder that all things change. A soft rain is not an inconvenience, it's a kind of music, a kind of blessing. I used to think I needed to escape to nature, to travel far, to visit forests or oceans. But I've learned that sometimes, all it takes is a window open to the breeze. A bowl of water with a floating leaf. A stone on a shelf. A walk beneath trees, even if only for 10 minutes. Nature doesn't ask for your schedule. It only asks for your attention. When I began placing small pieces of nature around my home, a branch, a flower, a shell, something softened. The space became more forgiving. My thoughts slowed down. There was something grounding about sharing the room with something alive, something that asked for nothing but to be seen. In moments of overwhelm, nature teaches without words. It reminds you to breathe like the wind, to shift like the seasons, to grow slowly and let go gently. Even a single flower on the table can change how the room feels and how you feel in it. What would happen if you let nature back in even just a little? Could the earth in its quiet way be trying to steady you? Lesson 5. Let go of what you're not using. There was a drawer in my home that I hadn't opened in months. I didn't need what was inside it: old chargers, pens that no longer worked, forgotten souvenirs. But still I kept it, just in case someday came. But someday never did. One afternoon I sat quietly in front of that drawer and opened it slowly. Not to organize, not to sort, just to look. And what I saw wasn't just clutter, it was hesitation, fear. A quiet belief that maybe I would need these things to feel complete. That maybe letting go meant losing something important. But the truth is, that drawer wasn't holding what I needed. It was holding what I hadn't yet released. In Japanese homes, especially those shaped by traditional aesthetics, there is often less. Not from scarcity but from clarity. Space is not something to be filled but something to be honored. The belongings that remain are not many, but they are cared for, used, and seen. They have purpose. Letting go is not about minimalism as a trend. It's about honesty. Are you using this? Does it still carry life? Or is it holding on to a past version of you that no longer fits? Sometimes we don't realize how heavy something has become until we finally set it down. I began letting go slowly. A shirt I hadn't worn in years. a notebook I never wrote in, a mug that had a crack I kept pretending not to see. Each item left with a thank you not for what it was now but for what it once gave me. And with every release the space around me grew quieter, and so did the space inside. Letting go is not a loss. It's a gentle return to yourself, to what matters now. What are you keeping, not because it serves you but because you're afraid to release it? And how would it feel to make space for who you're becoming? Lesson 6. Let enough be enough. There was a time when I believed peace would come after I had more. More time. More money. More approval. More answers. But every time I reached one milestone, another appeared on the horizon just out of reach. The chase never stopped. And the quiet I longed for never came. In Japan, I met a woman who lived in a small wooden house by the river. Her days were simple: cooking rice, tending her garden, sweeping her front steps. When I asked her if she ever wished for something more, she smiled and said, "Everything I need, I already have. And if I don't, maybe I don't need it." That moment felt like a mirror. It made me ask questions I had avoided. What does it mean to have enough? And who decides? I realized that enough was not a place or a number. It was a feeling, a quiet confidence that rises when you stop comparing, stop striving, and begin noticing. In Japanese culture, enough is often hidden in the gentle details. A single bowl of miso soup, a room with nothing but a cushion and a window, a handmade cloth passed down through generations. These things don't scream for attention, but they hold meaning. And that meaning multiplies not when we have more but when we feel more. I started practicing enoughness like a quiet ritual, saying thank you before I asked for more, finishing what I had before reaching for something else, breathing into the moment before rushing to the next. And slowly I began to feel a lightness. Not from having everything but from realizing I didn't need to. Letting enough be enough doesn't mean giving up on growth. It means anchoring your growth in gratitude, not in hunger. It means choosing to be full, even in the midst of imperfection. What might shift in your life if you stop chasing what's missing? Could it be that enough has always been here, quietly waiting for you to notice? There is a kind of peace that doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't announce itself with clarity or celebration. It arrives slowly, like morning light creeping across a quiet floor. It comes when you begin to notice, when you stop running, when you finally sit with yourself, not to fix anything, but simply to be. What I've shared with you is not a rule book, not a challenge, just a path I found carved quietly by those who lived before me, people who knew that small things matter, that presence is enough, that a life doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. Each lesson, or maybe each reminder, was never really about doing more. They were about seeing differently, creating space instead of filling it, listening instead of reacting, letting go instead of clinging. And in that space, a softer way of living began to emerge. Not perfect, but true. We are told to be busy, to be productive, to always want more. But Japanese wisdom offers a gentler voice, one that says, be where you are. Use what you have. Let stillness guide you. Trust the quiet. And maybe that's all we really need. Not another strategy. Not another possession. Just a quiet shift in how we hold the moment. So wherever you are, however full or noisy life may feel, pause. Not to escape, but to return. To your breath. To your senses. To what's already here. Because sometimes the life you're searching for is the one you're already living, just waiting to be seen with softer eyes.